Welcome to OAC Health Talks. I'm Joe Naglowski, President and CEO of the Obesity Action Coalition, and we are excited for you to join us for this educational series that dives deeper into specific health topics that we know are important to you and the OAC community. Health Talks are designed to empower you while providing straightforward, practical answers and insights from trusted experts. So let's dive into today's topic.
Hi, I'm Melinda Watman, and there is a big misconception between the obesity world and the eating disorder world, and that is that they're mutually exclusive. And my talking to you today is about the fact that they're not mutually exclusive. I'm going to share a little bit about my personal experience, but also add that the research these days says they're not mutually exclusive. So I'm going to talk about my obesity, my metabolic surgery, and my eating disorders. Before I had metabolic surgery, these were my diseases. After I had metabolic surgery, these are my diseases, and they're the same. And you would imagine that would be true because they're all chronic and they all need management. And I spend a lot of time, truthfully, managing them so that I'm healthy. I started out as a timeline factor as a 3-year-old with obesity. I grew up in a family of restrictors, and I learned that from the earliest days I can remember. I remember as a kid, when people were eating, I would be asked, if it was dessert, I would be asked, do you want to taste? And so that was my foundational experience with food. And it went on and on. Like many of us, I dieted, I lost weight, I gained weight, I lost more weight, I gained weight, gained more weight, on and on and on, until eventually at 45, I weighed 225 pounds, and I'm 5'1" on a good day with big hair, so my BMI was over 40, and I woke up one morning, I slapped my forehead, and I said, I can't live like this. And even though part of my brain was into the blame, shame, and no willpower, and I'm lazy and all of that, another part of my brain even then knew this was more than just me. This was not just about willpower. And unfortunately, it was in 2000, and there were no options of medication. And had there been, I probably would have used them. But instead, I had the option of surgery, which I took, and I never looked back. I was really pleased with having had it done. However, I had a misconception of my own, and that was that everything would be perfect. The what I call not enoughs would go away. Not thin enough, not smart enough, not successful enough, not enough, not enough. And that what I call the noise in my head, my obesity noise, and later my eating disorder noise, that would go away too. And none of that was true. In fact, it was the opposite. And so the one that was the loudest and reared its head the longest was the I'm not thin enough. And so what I would do is I'd reach a plateau, and then I'd say, oh, another 5 pounds. And then I'd reach another plateau, and I'd say, oh, maybe 10 more pounds. And this was over the years. This took years. But at one point, I remember very proudly, this was in 2023, very proudly announcing to a friend of mine on a walk that I was under 100 pounds, and I thought it was the holy grail. And even though I knew under 100 pounds was not good, I also saw myself as this big and that I wasn't thin enough still. And that wasn't the case. I was too thin, and I was really, really sick. And so I had the whole gamut: restriction, binge eating, purging. And I will say that the purge was pure catharsis. Every fiber of my being was catharted through that purge, and it lasted a nanosecond. And the truth is, I didn't want to give up that nanosecond until I was either in the hospital, being held there in 2021 until I had placement and treatment, or until in 2023, My sisters did an intervention, my friends did an intervention, and everybody rallied behind me to go into treatment. So I've been in treatment twice. I've been on death's door twice. And you would think, having been on death's door once, it would have been enough, but no, twice. And I came up with this, that in order to survive, you have to be resilient. In order to survive, you have to accept that you've got these problems, these diseases, and that you have to have goals that will take you forward. But mostly the thing that's most significant to me right now is stacking time. And by that I mean every single day is one more day that I get through without any eating disorder behaviors. And stacking time means it builds upon itself to the point where it feels almost normal that I'm normal. And I think from a what do you leave with and what do you think about when I'm done, it's that there is hope. Nobody should have any shame about any of this, not obesity, not eating disorders. And it's important to be honest with yourself and to talk to people who you really trust and know the resources that are available, the trustworthy resources. So thank you for your time, and I hope this was helpful.
Hi, I'm Kelly Broadwater, a psychologist and certified eating disorder specialist, and I'm thrilled to have been invited back by the OAC to talk about eating disorders in higher weight patients. This is a particular passion area of mine and something I've been doing for over 20 years. So why is this an important topic? Eating disorders have the second highest mortality rate of any mental health condition. I know you just heard Melinda talk about being on death's door numerous times. This is a very serious condition, and I feel like healthcare providers need to know that, patients need to know that. About 20% of people die from their eating disorders. The majority of people with eating disorders are higher weight. I'm going to say that again because I feel like there are so many misconceptions and stereotypes out there about eating disorders. The majority of people with eating disorders are actually at higher weights. The most common eating disorder, believe it or not, is binge eating disorder. So somebody living with obesity may or may not have binge eating disorder, and somebody with binge eating disorder may or may not be living with obesity. But they often go hand in hand. Eating disorders are often minimized, underreported, and go untreated in our higher weight patients. And I think weight bias is a major factor. I know I've trained medical residents who say, oh, I've never seen somebody with an eating disorder. And then by the time they're done with their training experience, they say, oh, I probably have, I just didn't know the questions to ask. So, and also that patients don't realize that they are dealing with an eating disorder. So hopefully that's why I'm talking today, and this will spread the word. I think it's really important because untreated eating disorders really set people up for a lot of different medical complications. And then it can also lead to difficulty with weight management options. So again, treatment is so essential. And I think that was definitely a takeaway from Melinda's portion of the talk. There is so much overlap between obesity and eating disorders. They are both complex, chronic, and often relapsing conditions. I think it's very important to note they are driven by biology, not by choice. Again, I can't stress that enough. These are not choices. These are biologically based diseases. There is a huge genetic component to both of them. And it's not just about, willpower or behavior change. There's a lot more that goes into it. Both obesity and eating disorders impact multiple organ systems, again, making both of them potentially fatal. I think it's very important to note how vulnerable to stigma both obesity and eating disorders are. There's, again, so many myths and misconceptions out there, and I think it was very, very important to take away from Melinda's talk that there is no shame in this. So please, making sure that, if you've been victim to stigma, that you push through that to get the treatment that you really need. And both require multidisciplinary care. It takes a whole team to get people well and on their journey to recovery. There are many, many disordered eating characteristics, and I'm not going to go through all of these, at length. I think it's important to think about eating existing on a spectrum. So over here we have normal eating, which unfortunately in kind of our diet and food toxic culture, not many people are normal, intuitive, just healthy eaters with no concerns about body image or weight. And then there are people who engage in disordered eating and it never meets, the criteria, becomes full-blown to escalate to an eating disorder. So kind of, can morph along, but there are many different characteristics of eating disorders. And I think it's important to just really think about how much is this impacting my quality of life? If my preoccupation with food or weight or body image is really impairing me or holding me back, that's definitely a characteristic of disordered eating. Having a lot of rules or rigidity about things, or on the flip side, a lot of loss of control and compulsivity and impulsivity. I think it's important to note that so many of the disordered eating characteristics are tied to feelings of guilt and shame. So guilt and shame about not being enough, like Melinda talked about. And eating for comfort, not hunger. This is something we all do, in social settings and celebrations and whatnot. But if this is a pervasive pattern that's happening a lot and causing distress or causing medical issues or weight issues, that's something that needs to be looked at. So I'm going to go through today. I have a very ambitious amount of material, just a brief overview of all the different eating disorders. And, I could talk for hours and hours about this. So you're just going to get a small snippet of the different signs and symptoms. And if you recognize any of these in yourself or your patients, please definitely do more to learn and to research and to seek professional help. So binge eating disorder, like I said, is the most common eating disorder. And it's really characterized by somebody eating a lot in a short period of time, eating till they're uncomfortably full, they feel sick, they're stuffed, they're miserable, they're not maybe hungry or even feeling like the food tastes good. A lot of my clients describe it as being an autopilot, and they're just kind of using food or eating to numb out, and they're not even really paying attention to how it tastes. A major factor with binge eating disorder is the loss of control. So just feeling like, you don't have a handle on this behavior. And that can lead to a lot of different things like hiding, hoarding, sneaking food, lying about what you've eaten. It has kind of a addictive quality to it where it can be very shrouded in secrecy and shame. If you eat differently when you're alone than in front of others, that's kind of a big red flag to look at. And I think it's also important to note that binge eating disorder can be a result of not eating enough food. So somebody can be kind of restrictive in their intake, and then as a reaction, they're going to binge. And again, anybody who, whether they have an eating disorder or not, if you restrict their intake enough when they do have a chance to eat, they're going to be more likely to overeat. This is where it's a pervasive pattern of that, where they're doing that over and over and over again, and kind of that reactionary eating to trying to be restrictive. Moving on to bulimia, it's similar to binge eating in that the person is eating a large amount of food in a short period of time. They're engaging in binge behavior. And again, if this is somebody who's had metabolic and bariatric surgery, I should have said this for binge eating as well. The amount of food is kind of relative to what surgery you've had and how much you can consume comfortably. So what looks like a binge in somebody who's had metabolic surgery will look different than somebody who hasn't had metabolic surgery oftentimes. Again, characterized by that loss of control, just feeling like can't stop, don't really have control over this behavior. And then the difference is with bulimia, there is some kind of compensating after eating to get rid of the food or the calories that have been consumed. So we most often think of purging via vomiting, self-induced vomiting, which is the most common way, but there's many other ways. I'm not going to go into all the gory details, but laxative use and overexercise are also other forms of compensation. Anorexia. You might think, okay, you're doing a presentation on eating disorders in higher weight patients. What does this have to do? I will make the case for that. So Anorexia is restricting food intake, and which leads to excessive weight loss or very low body weight. Now, it doesn't always lead to low body weight, and I'll get to that on the next slide. So restricting food intake to the extreme. Also accompanied by an intense fear of becoming fat. This is just to the level of a phobia. Clients are terrified of gaining weight. They also have a very distorted view of self. So they do not see themselves as other people see them. They just think they are so much bigger, and they might be really perseverating on specific parts of the body and how they look. And they just do not have a realistic view of it. I kind of liken it to color blindness. If somebody colorblind walks into a room and argues with you about what color the walls are, that doesn't mean the walls aren't the color that you think they are because you can see them. It means the person with color blindness perceives that wrong. It's kind of the same way with body image distortion. A major characteristic is a denial of how serious the problem is. I see this all the time in my practice where people are having, very serious medical complications and they just still think they're not sick enough. So again, Melinda talked about having an intervention with family and friends. I think that was to confront her denial of how serious it had gotten. There are such a wide variety of medical complications that actually go along with all eating disorders, not just anorexia, but I've highlighted a few here. And then there's a true obsession and over perseverating on food, weight, and body. So what does this have to do with higher weight patients? Atypical anorexia is kind of rampant right now. And this is where somebody has the exact same mindsets and behavior as anorexia, but their body weight is either normal or above average, or even qualifies for a diagnosis of obesity. So, for example, I had a patient who was in our intensive outpatient program. She was highly restrictive, and her labs were terrible. And she came into treatment and said, I don't belong here. I don't look like any of these other women. I'm the biggest one in there. And I couldn't tell her because of HIPAA that her labs were actually the worst of anyone that she was comparing herself to. So there's the same level of malnutrition that happens in atypical anorexia and the same level of medical complications. Actually, the medical complications can be more severe and more dangerous because oftentimes it goes untreated or unnoticed, or even people will get praised for weight loss by their friends or families or even their doctors. But if you don't know how they're doing it, if they're not doing it in a safe and healthy way, it can lead to some pretty dangerous problems. So it's important to pay more attention to behavior and lab values than BMI. And that's a huge takeaway for atypical anorexia. Night eating syndrome doesn't get a whole lot of press, but I wanted to talk about it today and include it because it is much more common in higher weight patients. And this is where somebody consumes 25% or more of their daily intake after dinner or even during the night where they're waking up from sleep to eat. Now, this is not a kind of sleepwalking situation where they don't realize they're eating. They are aware. That's a different bird. So there's a strong desire to eat between dinner and sleep, often accompanied by some pretty severe insomnia. So the person really believes that eating will help them with falling asleep. They also show depressed or lower mood in the evening. And this, of course, is distressing or impairing their functioning. So I did want to include night eating because I don't think it gets enough attention. So I know that was a really quick run through. Components of treatment. Like I said, both obesity and eating disorders really require a multidisciplinary approach to care. And so some of that can look like all of these things, certain components of these things. It's important to kind of build a team and build as much support as you need. So individual counseling with a behavioral health professional that specializes in eating disorders, nutritional counseling with a registered dietitian who specializes in eating disorders. I often have eating disorder, I'll have patients with eating disorders say, I know everything about nutrition. I could teach a class. I've been on every program. it's not so much about what to eat, it's about how to eat and how to change your relationship with food. And that's really where that registered dietitian can be helpful. It's so crucial if you haven't figured out how dangerous and medically complicated eating disorders can be, that a person dealing with an eating disorder gets a medical evaluation and ongoing monitoring. It's really just kind of non-negotiable because of the mortality rate and the different complications that can occur. Psychiatric care if needed. I don't think in 22 years of practice I've ever treated someone who just had an eating disorder. There was usually, some kind of depression or anxiety, very often comorbid with trauma, other addictions, OCD, so ADHD. So psychiatric care can be a key piece of helping alleviate some of the underlying psychiatric conditions that may be exacerbating the eating disorder. Group counseling is also a wonderful component to treatment. And, I think one of the great things that came out of COVID was that there are so many more virtual options. And pretty much any night of the week, someone can log on to free group counseling care for eating disorders. Lastly, I think it's very important if family or loved ones are a support to you, that they are involved, that they know about what's going on with you and learn from professionals about the best way to offer support, because they might be doing things unintentionally that are unhelpful. And so being able to dialogue about that and get feedback and have them just be the best source of support possible that they can. Isolation is the number one risk factor for development of an eating disorder and for relapse of an eating disorder. So I think it's really important. You have to kind of build your community of care and support. And then potentially someone might need a higher level of care. Melinda talked about going away to treatment twice. These are medically complex, and sometimes somebody really requires a level of medical monitoring and supervision and therapeutic care that can't be done outpatient or at home. So what to do if you think you have an eating disorder? Educate yourself, which you're taking the first step by watching this Health Talk. There are so many great resources online. I've just given you a few snippets. Again, telling people you trust that you're struggling, because eating disorders thrive in secrecy, and we want to break that and get people the support they need. Seeking professional and specialized support, including medical care. I cannot stress enough that the person that you are seeing needs to be eating disorder informed. The way I think about it is, if I have a heart problem, I'm not going to go to my primary care. I'm going to go to a cardiologist. It's kind of the same thing with eating disorders. You can't just go to a general therapist or dietitian. You really need that specialized support from someone who has that training and background. So to that end, I have listed several different websites where you can find eating disorder professionals that specialize. Again, if you're like, oh my gosh, I live out in the middle of nowhere, how am I going to find someone in my community? The great thing is now that there's so many virtual options. So being aware of that and seeking that out. And that is it for my talk today. Thank you so much for your time and attention.
Wow, that was a great health talk. It's your support that makes this program possible and free for everyone to join. If you'd like to support our education efforts, please make a donation today. Together, we can make a lasting impact and create a more informed and empowered community.
The OAC has a variety of educational opportunities for you throughout the year, but one of the best places you can turn to for quality, unbiased education is our resource library. Simply visit obesityaction.org/library to check out our brochures, articles, guides, videos, and more health talks. Also be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to get notified about any future educational events. Thanks for joining us.